Okay, please. Have a seat. Excellent. Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Carl Blanchet. I'm a professor at the University of Geneva at the Faculty of Medicine. I'm also the director of the Geneva Center of Humanitarian Studies. So welcome to this celebration to celebrate 25 years of existence for this center. And we have the pleasure tonight to see a few former colleagues who were running the center before I arrived 3 years ago. So I'm very new at the center, but we've got Tim Harding who is here, and I would like also to pay tribute to some of the former members of the board of this committee. Professor Gorin is here, and a few other colleagues. And 25 years is very much the achievement of several generations of researchers and academics who have built what the center is today. And so I just wanted to pay tribute to the legacy of all these colleagues who have really shaped this center and how it is today. And to celebrate tonight, we've got an exciting program. We've got a few interventions, and we're going to have a panel discussion, and then we will invite you as well to be part of the discussion. You will be invited to contribute and to offer comments, but as well to interact with our panelists. And we will invite you afterwards to share a glass with us and to celebrate this moment with us and having a nice relaxing time. Tonight is very much about celebrating. So in academic world, it does not mean partying and dancing and so on, but it's still a celebration with a lot of smiles and a lot of memories that we're going to share, and a lot of ideas for thought for the future as well, to make sure that the center has a long life. Without waiting, I would like to invite our chancellor at the University of Geneva to offer a welcome speech, Professor Yves Feuquiger.
Monsieur l'ancien recteur de l'Université de Genève, Monsieur le vice-recteur, dear colleagues, dear students, it's a real pleasure for me to be with you tonight to celebrate this special event, the 25th anniversary of the Geneva Center for Humanitarian Studies. And this is a studies and a center that we have in common with the Graduate Institute. And I would like also on behalf of the Graduate Institute to welcome you very warmly to this event. It's one of these centers that we have with the Graduate Institute, one of the 3 centers. The other one being the Geneva Academy for Human Rights, and the other one, the Center for International Dispute Settlements, not to mention a first one, which is coming very soon, hopefully, the Geneva Water Hub. Over the years, the center has offered a dynamic teaching and research program that is very relevant to nowadays reality. The context of this event is marked not only by the fact that we are commemorating this year on December 10, the 70th anniversary of the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but also by the dramatic situation in which part of the planet finds itself. The millions of displaced people in Sudan, the 120,000 Armenians who have had to flee from Nagorno-Karabakh in recent months, and the atrocities committed in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are all signs of a geopolitics based on outdated balances. These events call into question the universality of human rights, both in terms of their definition and in the nature of the political and legal framework for enforcing them. More than ever, the Geneva Center for Humanitarian Studies plays a crucial role in providing concrete answers to the humanitarian challenges facing our society. This center perfectly matches some of our values and some of our missions. Firstly, it draws on the fact that our university is a comprehensive university with 9 faculties and 13 interdisciplinary centers. It is really a fundamental asset when it comes to tackling challenges that can only be analyzed from an interdisciplinary perspective. Secondly, it perfectly illustrates our strategy of forging links with International Geneva in constant dialogue with the various NGOs and international organizations that make up our continent's rich heritage. Ultimately, it symbolizes our university's determination to have a social impact. In a nutshell, the center is a unique player in the International Geneva community. Every year, we present the Swiss ambassador to the UN with some of the major initiatives undertaken by the University of Geneva. And every year, we are delighted to hear how the University of Geneva contributes to the humanitarian system. The diversity of the students who benefit from the teaching program is an excellent example of what a university can offer to our society in this very difficult time. Tonight's program is very rich, and we hope you will enjoy it with us. We wish the Geneva Center every success in continuing its work and making our university a place that offers academic opportunities to humanitarian professionals from countries in crisis. I wish you a very interesting evening with fruitful exchanges. Don't forget to celebrate, as Carl mentioned it, all together, celebrate the success of the center and to thank all the people who made it possible, especially Carl and his amazing team. And as you know, the life of a rector is going from one place to another. So tonight I have something else waiting for me at 7 o'clock, so I will not be able to celebrate with you. But again, I wish you a very fruitful event. Thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you very much. And there's a long tradition in this center as well to be, as our Chancellor mentioned, to be being a joint center. And I would like to pay tribute as well to the former directors of this center. In 2003, Professor Jean-Jacques Wagner from the Faculty of Science here at the University of Geneva was the director of this center. And then followed by someone from the Graduate Institute, Professor Jean-Daniel Reinhorn, who actually led this center between 2004 and 2011, and followed by my predecessor, Professor Doris Schopper, between 2011 and 2019. All these 3 directors, and before that the generation, and people who have contributed to the center, have really demonstrated how a center can be at the heart of the international capital of humanitarian aid, but as well can demonstrate how a center can be in between 2 prestigious institutions. I would like to invite Professor Joost Pauwelin, who is the head of the International Law Department at the Graduate Institute, to give us a talk. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. This is a very impressive room. We don't have such big rooms at the Graduate Institute. My name is Joost Pauwelin, and I'm the head of the International Law Department at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies, the other academic institution just across the lake. It's really my honor and privilege to welcome you here on behalf of the Institute on this very festive occasion, the 25th anniversary of the CIRA. It's been mentioned before, we've have a number of collaborative projects with the University of Geneva, but this one is one of the oldest ones. The Academy is there, the Center for International Dispute Settlement. I'm also on that committee, but this one is special and quite unique. I've been trying to collect information on the center, talking to many colleagues at the Institute, colleagues who come from the law department, who come from the Department of International Relations, the anthropology department, the sociology department. So it's been a very collaborative effort on our side to work together. And the two things that have come back talking to colleagues is that, first of all, the CA has been able to connect international Geneva with the federal institutions in Bern. And that has been incredibly useful to make that connection. The other thing that came back is how, and I think more so than the other projects we have in common, how the center has been able to bring together academic institutions with people in the field. And we'll hear from Gilles. Of course, the ICRC is a partner, also the MSF. And very uniquely, talking to some people who've also followed programs here, courses, I think for practitioners, it's a unique opportunity to share your experiences with other practitioners and to think of best practices. So it's very hands-on, very practical. At the same time, it gives you an opportunity to think and stand still and to critically analyze what you're doing on a daily basis in the field. So, and as the Graduate Institute, this is one of the things we really try to achieve across the board, to make it practical, but to also reflect critically on how we can make things better. Look, I'm an international lawyer. I'm a law practitioner as well. And it's been mentioned before, the world is scary if you look at what's happening. Many of the regimes we work in are under critique, under pressure. I tend to work mainly in the economic field, but it's no different there. In the field of war, migration, the environment, all of these regimes are under stress. And when I get up in the morning, one day I get up depressed, thinking about, this will never work. We will never be able to make this work. On the other hand, and that's what I tell my students as well, this is a moment where we can think critically. We can go back to basics, defend the basic principles that we all believe in, find energy to make it better, find energy to reform, to make a system that is more efficient, that is more responsive. I'm not a humanitarian practitioner, but when I think of humanitarian action, I think of it as being on the coalface of what goes wrong in the world. And I'm sure that you have to face many of these practical impacts on the ground. So from war to natural disasters, from mass migration to development challenges. But humanitarian action is also the place where you can make a difference. Often I'm sitting there as a lawyer high up in my academic ivory tower, and I'm quite envious of people who are in the field making a difference as a humanitarian professional. I think it's not an exaggeration to say that CERA has been able to make that difference over the last 25 years. And we at the Graduate Institute, we certainly hope that you'll continue to make that difference. And we are very happy to celebrate here with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Just. So this center has been at the joint center of two academic institutions, but more than that, people who have set up this center always wanted to make sure that this center can be inspired and influenced by practitioners. And this is why on the board, the Swiss Cooperation Department sits. MSF has a seat, and as well RCRC. And they influence, they inspire us, but as well they give us new ideas, and they really shape what we do in terms of research, but as well in terms of courses and teaching. I'm full of admiration with RCRC, and you probably have seen, like me, the latest images from Gaza, how they have managed with the hostages and how they have been involved in dealing with the hostages. And so I would like you to Professor Gilles Carbonnier, to take the floor. Gilles is the Vice President of RCRC, but used to be the chair of the board of this center. So he knows the center from the inside. And it's a great privilege because I know how busy Gilles is with what is going on in the world. So thank you very much, Gilles, for coming, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Monsieur le recteur, monsieur le directeur du centre, cher Karl, chers étudiants, alumni, amis, staff, collègues actuels, mais aussi anciens mentors et collègues du centre d'études humanitaires, bonsoir à vous toutes et tous. Je crois que je partage avec vous le fait que c'est avec pas mal d'émotion que je me joins à cette célébration du 25e anniversaire du centre qui a eu toutes sortes de noms différents, et diverses incarnations. Et puis, je crois que j'ai eu la chance, au fond, de pouvoir donner au moins une session, participer à une session au cours de ces 25 dernières années, chaque année, à part cette année-ci, me semble-t-il. Et donc de voir le centre évoluer, mais aussi de rencontrer, d'avoir tant d'échanges avec des participants, des étudiants qui viennent, des professionnels de l'humanitaire, que l'on retrouve après, que je retrouve après sur le terrain, que ce soit en Afrique, au Moyen-Orient, en Asie ou ailleurs. Puis je dois dire que c'est vraiment un sujet de grande fierté de voir ces trajectoires professionnelles, mais aussi l'engagement des participants qui ont suivi, qui sont venus à Genève, qui ont fait des modules au CERA, qui poursuivent ensuite cet engagement humanitaire, qui souvent ont un boost après le passage au CERA pour développer cet engagement et cette carrière. Et c'est vraiment une source d'inspiration pour nous aussi en tant qu'enseignants participants. J'aimerais partager avec vous un certain nombre de réflexions sur l'évolution, au fond, des compétences de l'humanitaire, de la formation dans le domaine humanitaire. And to do so, I will switch to English and I will put my glasses. And I will follow with just starting to look backwards, and then I will look a bit forwards. Looking backwards, I found back a landmark article in the International Review of the Red Cross dating back September 1975. And the article is entitled ICRC Delegate, a Demanding and Fascinating Career. And it starts with defining the profile of a delegate. And I quote, "He must be a man of goodwill." So, of course, back then you can sense that he was supposed to be a man and a humanitarian worker born with goodwill. But the author later says that there have been a few women delegates until 2025, and that the situation is evolving fast, recognizing that, and I quote again, "Women members of ICRC delegations make an effective contribution to its accomplishment." In terms of competencies, the article highlights that the ICRC delegate must have a combination of such contradictory qualities as to make him quite an exceptional being. And these contradictions are quite interesting because I think many of them are still with us today. He must combine the dynamism of youth and the prudence of maturity. He must be able to take quick decisions, but must avoid being hasty. He must be impartial, but not insensitive. He must have initiative, but also a good team spirit. He must be a systematic organizer and an inspired improviser. He must carry the humanitarian mission in his heart without acting like a missionary zealot. And then there are two assets which are more ICRC specific. He must know enough to keep his mouth shut about confidential matter. And second, he must be Swiss, since he is called upon to conduct negotiations as a neutral intermediary. So, as you can see, there is a big, much focus of the innate human qualities of a humanitarian worker. And I think that rather than figuring out that some people might be natural-born humanitarians, today things have evolved and changed. But a few traits remain, primarily this essential combination of reason and compassion, a combination of emotions in front of the suffering of others, based on this principle of humanity where we cannot stand still. And the emotion in front of suffering of others is the fuel that makes us act. But before acting, we need to analyze and understand the situation and then figure out what is the best decision I should take and the best behavior in the short term and longer term interest of those I want to protect and assist. And I think that this remains with us up to this day. And the center has really as its heart this principle of humanity, of impartiality, the fundamental humanitarian principles, and then brings knowledge, expertise, understanding of the complexities today of this world to help in this reasoning process that follow the immediate resolve to act and react to the suffering, to the killings, to mass atrocities. This article published by the International Review of the Red Cross back in 1975 gives us some indication about how the ICRC organized training back then. And indeed, since 1970, it has started to give about 3, 4, 5 times a year a one-week course where a number of outsiders were coming, including young Swiss diplomats. And the part of it was more to get acquainted with the international movement of the Red Cross and Red Crescent. Part of it was to understand some specifics about the ICRC. And international humanitarian law, they mention in particular the 3rd Geneva Convention regarding prisoners of war and the 4th Geneva Convention regarding civilians. And then they had a number of simulation exercises already back then, a simulation of visits to detention places. And I would say the cherry on the cake was at the end of the training, meeting with the ICRC president who was giving an overview of the activities of the ICRC across the world. So then the candidate went back home and for months could sit and work in something, waiting for a call when armed conflicts in the world necessitated to dispatch these new recruits to the field. And they were coming back to the ICRC to get then the more contextual briefings on where they would be sent. But what I found interesting is that, and I quote in the article, they say, and then a period is spent at the Institute of Development Studies, the former IUED, affiliated with the Geneva Graduate Institute, to obtain background knowledge on the ethnographic, geopolitical, and economic situations in the region of assignment. And when I think of some of the pillars of the training given at CERA, we have geopolitical understanding, anthropological and ethnographic inquiry techniques, but also understanding of the local situation through a week back then in the anthropology of humanitarian action, and so forth. So it's still very much valid. And even if the article stressed the importance of prior training, it stresses even more than the responsibility of those in charge on the field to onboard new humanitarian workers and to train them on the job, saying that to become a well-rounded humanitarian worker, varied field experiences provide the best school. So many of these considerations remain valid today, and yet much has changed, and that's where I think that the center of the Geneva Center of Humanitarian Studies has really adapted to capture these new challenges and the changing environment. Humanitarian action is no more a marginal epiphenomenon in international relations. It doesn't concern just a handful of UN agencies and the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. It has become a central tenet of international relations and also a universal movement anchored in a global ideology. And I think that if we look at news over the past 2 years, we see that indeed approaching international relations immediately, the question of the humanitarian dimension of the situation and the humanitarian response that is brought is something that is taken up by media, but also at the UN Security Council and beyond. And since the creation of the Geneva Center of Humanitarian Studies 25 years ago, the humanitarian sector has been actually booming like hardly any other sector in terms of the number of people working in the sector. This is partly good news because it reflects the vibrancy of the global humanitarian engagement. The humanitarian sector has become highly diversified. It's a diversified ecosystem with an ever-increasing range of professions, skills, and expertise. But this is also sad news, because this booming of the humanitarian sector reflects the multiplication of armed conflict, which have more than tripled since the turn of the millennium, and also the multiplication of people forcibly displaced and people requiring humanitarian aid. According to the UN, 10 years ago, it was 144 million people needing humanitarian assistance, and today it's over 360 million people. And the sad news is also that probably this increase in the booming in the humanitarian sector reflected also the fact that often richer countries have supported humanitarian action by default to compensate probably for the absence of a collective will to bring armed conflict to an end and continued blockages at the UN Security Council. Well, dear colleagues and friends, let me turn to research. The field of humanitarian studies has emerged as a new academic area, and an International Humanitarian Studies Association was created in 2009. It reflects a rise in research on humanitarian issues by scholars and by practitioners from different disciplines and backgrounds. The definition of humanitarian studies is the subject of endless conversations, and the International Association of Humanitarian Studies defined the field as the study of humanitarian crises caused by disasters, conflict, and political instability, and the responses, the study of the responses to these crises by a range of actors, including, of course, humanitarian organizations, but also authorities and other organizations. It examines how humanitarian crises evolve, how they affect people and their institutions, communities and societies, and the responses they trigger, including the intended and unintended consequences of humanitarian action. So, this is a broad and debatable definition of humanitarian studies. But it opens a new field of inquiry meant to help policymakers and practitioners better grasp complex humanitarian situations, strengthen their ability to assess and to respond to the needs. And here again, I think there is great variation between disciplines. Often our colleagues in public health, any research that they conduct is meant to improve public health outcome in humanitarian situations. And our colleagues, anthropologists, say, well, if we do research, it's to really question assumptions and standard practices and to raise new questions. But we are not here to offer solutions. And I think that this diversity of approach is welcome, and it's what enriches this interdisciplinary field. I will finally turn to the future. I think a future where research and education in the humanitarian sector will be more important than ever. We have seen that the humanitarian sector is facing mounting critique. It is the subject of very violent hate speech and disinformation campaigns in many contexts nowadays. It is also facing mounting critique from the affected populations and from others. We see calls for enhanced localization, decolonization, greater efficiency, greater transparency, and also greater impact. The humanitarian sector has had to professionalize, to adopt quality standards, processes, and new technologies to improve support functions and program quality. Humanitarians are faced with more complex situations, I think mainly because armed conflict happens ever more in the midst of cities, with highly densely networked systems that we have to protect and sometimes restore, with a multiplication of armed groups and backers. We see also that conflicts are more protracted, which raises the urgency of coming to grip with this nexus between humanitarian action, development, and peace building. And we see that fast scientific and technological advances give rise to new means and methods of warfare one topic which has been highly debated, rightly so, is automated weapon systems, including algorithm and AI determining whom to kill and when and how. And we see that the digital transformation and development of instant communications is also offering new opportunities, but new risk for the humanitarian sector, with sometimes campaigns directly against humanitarian actors on the field. So today we need humanitarian actors with both very generic skills, who are able to make sense of the overall objective of humanitarian action in terms of protection and assistance and prevention. But at the same time, we need top-notch, very specific expertise in different areas of specialization. In this context, I think collaboration with academia is absolutely essential, and it goes way beyond an introspection of the humanitarian sector on its own business, but must involve practitioners, researchers across different sectors, disciplines, and also geographies. You will hear later with Claire Wang, who is here, more about how the ICRC has collaborated and is collaborating with the center at present. I think the ICRC is also collaborating with an ever greater range of academic institutions in the south, but also in Switzerland, for instance, with the EPFL and ETH in Zurich, both to have joint call for research proposal, but also to translate research outcomes into concrete applications, and to have online courses that can reach out also to people in the field. To conclude, let me just come back on the profile of the ICRC delegate depicted in 1975. Since then, I think we have moved away from the Swiss man born exceptional and forged by the experience of the field. And what we want, as far as the ICRC is concerned, is to have and build a truly global, diverse, inclusive workforce of highly skilled and engaged, trained professionals. And this is precisely where I think the Center of Humanitarian Studies is doing a very important contributions, because you are engaging with mid-career professionals from all walks of lives, the vast majority of them coming from those very contexts where humanitarian crises are happening. And through generations now, the center is contributing to equip, to engage, to network with humanitarian workers, especially humanitarian workers from those contexts, who are now the proud alumni, many of whom I see in the room, of the center. So, to conclude, mesdames, messieurs, chers amis, bâtissant sur un demi-siècle d'expérience, le Centre d'études humanitaires est idéalement positionné pour accompagner les évolutions rapides et les défis humanitaires à venir, répondant aux besoins de recherche et d'enseignement. Nul doute qu'il saura continuer à innover pour offrir à Genève, capitale de l'humanitaire, un centre de référence mondial dans le champ des études humanitaires. Longue vie à notre cher centre des études humanitaires.
Thank you very much. Beautiful spectrum we have. I'm glad we have evolved from this 1975 profile and vision. I just wanted to, I can see a lot of colleagues from University of Geneva, but also can see a lot of students from the center. And I think they are a fantastic testimony of who we want to work with, and we learn a lot at the center in terms of as a researcher, but as well in our team. I just want to thank as well tonight for the organization of the event, Irina, who is leading our communication at the center, who's doing a fantastic job. Valerie as well, you're going to hear in a few seconds, who has been involved a lot, and Joël, who is leading the administration of the center, and sometimes is pulling her hair to try to match our needs and rapid needs sometimes with some administrative procedures. So thank you to this team and to the rest of the team who actually have been as well challenged a lot in their not daily routine, but as well in some of the vision they had, and have adapted so quickly and bring every day new ideas and make this center dynamic and very, very agile. To lead and facilitate this roundtable or this panel, I would like to invite Dr. Valérie Gorin, who is the head of teaching at the center, who is and has shaped and completely changed as well, transformed the way we teach as a center and in this new environment, not only in terms of humanitarian crisis, but as well what we have lived in the last 3 years. Valérie.
We're a big panel. So thank you, everyone, and it's really a pleasure to be here tonight and to have so many people in the room, including our alumni. We decided for tonight that the alumni should be essential, also in the discussions we have about the state of the humanitarian sector and the importance of education within this sector. So I have the pleasure of having tonight among our panelists, we have Mrs. Claire Ong-Sperendio, who's replacing Moini Guy-Kramer, who had to cancel her participation. But thank you very much, Claire, for being with us tonight and for replacing her. We also so Claire is the Director of People and Culture at the ICRC. We also have with us William Epson, who was actually an alumnus, who was with us in 2014, 2015, but tonight he will be here as the Head of Learning and Development with Médecins Sans Frontières Switzerland. And we also have the pleasure to have Charles-Antoine Hoffmann, who's the Section Chief Emergency Division at UNICEF. But also with me tonight, along the table, we have the pleasure of having Mariam Ismail, who's an alumna from 2013, but who is currently working as the Regional Program Coordinator for the MENA region with Geneva Call. We also have Arjun Claire, who's an alumnus from 2015, and you work now as a policy advisor at the ICRC. We also have Tala, who just recently graduated in 2022 and who works with an international medical organization. And finally, Eric Wyss, also an alumnus from 2013, Deputy Coordinator of the Global Child Protection Area of Responsibility, also at UNICEF. So our alumni will be together speaking with their own voices about their experience with the center and their learning experience. And so we're happy to share the perspective with our three other panelists who also represent the path of education, the place of education, and the partnerships with academic institutions in Switzerland. So the idea for this roundtable is to have really a conversation, a discussion of several aspects of education. We'll take roughly around 50 minutes, and then we'll take your questions in the room before we move to a wonderful cocktail that's waiting for us. So What we'll share tonight are a few perspectives about what Gilles Carbonnier has already introduced. It was very interesting to hear about the work of a delegate 40 years ago. We'll compare it with the needs and the realities of today's humanitarian context by questioning the role of humanitarian studies. So, since 20 years, 25 years, humanitarian studies have become a new field, a burgeoning field of research, of academic and applied research, of teaching and training, of policy, practice making, debate making, of networking and public outreach. Although it is a debated field, it's really hard actually to give a clear definition of what are humanitarian studies and the scope of humanitarian studies. So this is some of the learning objectives. We're using a word cloud to represent some of the learning objectives we have about our master program. But maybe I would like to open with the first question to Claire, maybe, talking about the ICRC. How do you consider the role of academic education within the people you hire at the ICRC? Especially, how do you consider candidates with an academic background in your organization?
Well, first of all, it's extremely important. And for us as an organization, learning and development is an extremely important investment, which gives you some inkling of how much we are also expecting for our candidate to come with baggage. But baggage isn't enough, so academic baggage isn't enough. And we're always striking the right balance between studies which are relevant to the ICRC, but also some experience. So we never hire people straight out of university. We're looking for some experience as well of working in multicultural context, and if possible, in humanitarian context, but not just. So I would say it's a balance of the two, but very important as well to have the humanitarian studies background.
Charles or William, would you like to rebound on this aspect?
It's actually hard to do better. It's fairly similar. I think what we are what we find interesting with people with academic background is also those analytical skills and this capacity of having thorough thinking and how there's a method to how things are being done. But I think having just people straight out of school is never enough. So we are looking for people that have both, but we're also encouraging people to go through a learning cycle. So we hope that there will be back and forth between the world of learning and also the professional development, but this has to be a continuous learning process. So we really encourage that it never stops. It's a continuous learning development, and we do think that as much as we encourage on-the-job learning, having these moments where you can get out of your daily job and you can reflect on your practice, or you can actually acquire new skills, but also new knowledge, I think this is essential.
So what's interesting is always the same question that we have in mind when we think about the needs in terms of humanitarian education. It's not just a technical expertise. And so the role of a center should not be to reproduce this kind of technical expertise. So we do have actually a specific approach or academic approach at the center, which is some of the most important perspectives. You see them here. So we actually want to emphasize the need that in terms of academic humanitarian training, it's not just about the study of a profession. It's not just the study of the humanitarian system. It's not just studying the what, the where, the who, the when, and the how, but it's also offering a critical approach to understanding what is humanitarian action, what is the system, who are the people involved in the humanitarian system. So it's about understanding more the expertise of humanitarian actors, its system of governance, the power dynamics involved in humanitarian action, but also its norms and its ethos. So turning now to our alumni, I would like to raise a first question. In your opinion, and maybe it's a bit provocative, but in your opinion, can we teach or can we learn the humanitarian experience? Tala, I think I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. No, I fully agree that, to me, studying the humanitarian world is not about studying the how-to. Our role was more to reflect on our experience, was to compare what we've seen in the field and in our real-time work with what we were talking about at the center, and it was about the exchange of these experiences. So I don't believe giving a standalone, let's say, study for humanitarian work is the way to go to reflect deeply on the work. And I would fear that that would narrow too much the concept of what we do.
Eric, would you like to bounce back on this?
I mean, first on the question, what is the humanitarian experience? I think, we tend maybe to think about an international organization, on the international, but there are a lot of organizations working at different levels and a lot of different functions as well. There is a frontliner, and this might be the idea we have in our heads when we're thinking about this, but there is also the management, people writing proposals, the supporting staff. So their humanitarian experience might change. And also, as a person in these organizations, your lifestyle as well is part of this experience, the lack of stability, moving from one place to another, being in challenging contexts. So I wouldn't want to be taught what the humanitarian experience is. This is very personal, but I think the reflection and the critical reflection we have at the center gives us tools to forge our judgment, and I think this is more valuable.
When we prepared this session, I remember some discussions we had, Mariam and Arjun, about maybe the issue of having too many idealistic people involved in the sector, or maybe a younger generation, idealistic people. Would you agree with that, or what would you say the role of the center and your experience you had with the center in addressing that, Mariam or Arjun?
I mean, I can sort of quickly respond to the first question. I'll basically respond based on my own experience, and I think what the masters did for me was, I think, two things. One, I think generally gives you, because when you're working in humanitarian action, you're very much taken by what's happening right now, and you don't necessarily have the historical perspective. But when you look back, I think it gives you it also gives you, it can guide you, it can allow you to deal with the moral and ethical complexities that you're dealing with right now. When you're actually doing it, I think you don't necessarily have that space to do that. So I think it gives you that critical distance. And I think the second thing is that generally when you work, most often you work in a specific field, your specific sector. I mean, humanitarian action has grown a lot. You have different clusters, different specializations. So it's very rarely that you have a vue d'ensemble. I mean, even if, for instance, if you are managing operations, you're taken up by a lot of bureaucratic things as well. So I think what it does, it gives you that critical, that gives you the view ensemble, and also I think a way to exchange as well, to confront your ideas, your own experiences, and especially I think that was something that I really liked at the center, was that people coming from different places, but different ideas of humanitarianism as well, and I think it allows you that confrontation. And just to close with the point on idealism, I think it's extremely important to have idealism. I think people who work in humanitarian action, who've worked a long time, I think sometimes can feel that jarring, the distance between that idealism and the reality, but I think it's still important to keep that idealistic spirit, and as Gilles Carpentier said, I think it's first and foremost, I think it's about those intrinsic values as well.
Yeah, we'll come back on this aspect of probably an involvement being value-laden in the humanitarian sector. I will conclude with this, but I will continue a discussion about humanitarian studies because I would say these recent years the center has involved a lot in a research project, and it's also part of what we mean by the institutionalization of the humanitarian studies, especially in terms of research fields. So, as you can see, this is just a very general overview of some of the main research projects that we currently have at the center, focusing on the health, history, innovation, the ethics, also migration. But it's interesting to see that it's always a question we have when we talk about research and humanitarian action. What exactly are we doing? Are we studying with humanitarian organizations? Are we studying humanitarian organizations themselves? Are we studying among humanitarian organizations? Are humanitarian organizations themselves involved in the academic research? So it's a shifting way of doing research about or with humanitarian organizations. So perhaps I would like to raise this question to you, Charles-Antoine. In your organization and UNICEF, but also in general, in your perspective, what is the added value in partnering with an academic institution, whether it is to conduct research or to create a course, for example?
Thank you very much. And I'm one of those who actually started before the center was created, so I don't have the pleasure of being an alumni. I'm not as old as the delegate that Gilles mentioned before. But over the years, I've seen the value of partnering with academic institutions, on the center in particular. And that's always been in my mind on multiple occasions, you know, at personal level, reflecting on my own experiences, on what the academic background I had, and how can I apply this concretely. So I'm delighted to see that these courses are now existing. I think the point was made before, but for me, what is critical is really this connection between the more academic approach through courses that are provided and the practitioner or the practical dimension. And I think unless we can make this connection, I don't necessarily see a direct benefit. And I think the way the courses have been shaped and the way multiple dimensions are covered. So it's not, I would definitely not look at it only from a sort of pure training perspective, but really looking at the previous diagram you had and all the different dimensions to reflect, to share. I think the peer-to-peer aspect is very critical. Going back and forth with you know, the practice in the field, the challenges we face, and then being able to reflect and learn and being equipped to deal with that. So I think the modalities are actually very important. And I think in a way, all the questions you asked before in terms of what does it do, I think it's all of that, you know, what should be covered, equipping colleagues to better deliver. And I think for us in UNICEF, I mean, that's definitely an important aspect to really ensure that we have this connection, that we provide opportunities. I'm extremely pleased that, you know, after thinking about it, we managed to actually have a meaningful collaboration with the center around the concept of accountability to affected populations and the CAS that was developed. And the rationale for doing that for me was, you know, knowing that we are very good at coming up with concepts and we use them all the time in the humanitarian sector as if everyone understood, including ourselves, the nexus, AAP, localization, etc. These are fairly complicated notions. They are not just there, you know, dropped somehow, and we understand how to apply them or you know, change the way we work. And I think, again, having some academic rigor, building from multiple, a wide range of practitioners with multiple experiences is extremely precious. And I think that this is really helping us to move forward and make sense of, you know, sometimes apparently very simple concepts, but we actually don't spend the time to really unpack what that means.
Claire and William, MSF and the ICRC is also involved in the co-creation or the teaching in some of our courses. Which kind of balance or measure do you make between the need for internal training, because you have your own training inside the organization, and the need maybe to send your employees to an academic course outside of the institution where you work? Perhaps, Claire, you want to react, and then William?
So we, as I said earlier, we invest enormously in learning and development. But the sheer size of our organization, because we're about 20,000 people, and the rotations and require us to actually focus on some certain type of learnings internally. And this is, very simply put, onboarding. Onboarding is extremely important, and we pride ourselves in having an incredible onboarding program, as well as leadership development and people management. And this is really what, kind of takes out all of our internal resources. So we need to partner with academia on everything else. And for us, those partnerships are extremely important. And I find also that they're not just important for us to feed ourselves from the knowledge that, we gain and the insights, but also to get out of the ICRC, because we live in the field with each other. I don't come from the field, but I see my colleagues who work in the field, live together, and you can basically spend your life at the ICRC, and it's extremely important to get out there and meet the other humanitarians outside of the ICRC. It's salutaire, it's salutaire. So I would say that that's another component of it.
William?
I think we sometimes, so we've got a large portfolio that is internal, maybe because it's a culture within MSF to think that there's a lot of things that we should do ourselves, also because we rely on highly trained professionals already. So I think there is something to do with a rather recent shift towards partnering with external, I love this word, external organization, as if there is an internal and an external. But what I find interesting is that what we're really looking sometimes at, especially with academia, it's really to sometimes even get challenged on our own certainties. So that's one thing that I think it's being in contact with others, being challenged on our certainty, being challenged on what we think is obvious is sometimes not, and I think we're looking for this. But we're also looking at providing opportunities to people that may not have this opportunity at an early stage. And some of our program is essentially to have some practitioners being able of converting their professional experience into something that is valued and recognized outside of MSF. And I think that this balance is quite interesting. And it feeds our own practice. And you were talking about peer learning, and I think it's really essential that we see universities, for example, as a way of acting with peers. And I think it's only going to go better, I would say.
So it's a form also to challenge your own knowledge and expertise and who you are, which is interesting if we compare it, if we take things in perspective and we recreate a timeline of the humanitarian history in these recent years, in these last 25 years, as well as the evolution of our center. So as the previous speakers have mentioned, our center has evolved from a pluri-faculty program to an interdisciplinary program to a Center of Education and Research, and now the Geneva Center of Humanitarian Studies, a form of recognition of the institutionalization of this field, but also it's an interesting fact to consider that our center has witnessed some of the very important contextual changes that have reshaped the humanitarian sector in this past 25 years. So crises like Rwanda in '94, the tsunami in Asia in 2004, the earthquake in Haiti have impacted the system, but also induced reforms within the system. So with the emergence of what we call today very complex emergencies, there was the need within the humanitarian sector for more coordination, more professionalization, new management models. So turning to our alumni once again, what would be today the kind of humanitarian workers you have out there in the field? Tala or Mariam, would you like to react? In terms of professionalization, in terms of action, in terms of expertise?
I think it's very interesting starting with, sorry, I don't want to give you my back. So starting with all the, being an idealistic humanitarian person, I think we are more and more becoming really, I would say, realistic, and just understanding that our, message or our role here is not to solve, is actually to improve. And I go back to Gilles Carbonnier on this. I think more and more we are going towards that. And that's where the distinction between a humanitarian and a politician, we don't have a decision or I would say like a mystery wound where we can say, okay, we want this crisis to stop. But at least what we can do is to find and to make the place or improve the life of civilians as much as we can. Going back to my experience, when I first joined, I think I was a little bit frustrated with the sector. There was huge frustration, but I think at the same time, I would say I came with maybe 100 questions that I was expecting that they should be answered through my masters and discussions with all the practitioners we've been meeting. I would say I left with more than 100,000 extra questions that were not answered. So,
I completely agree on the frustration part, because I started my humanitarian career as a national staff or locally hired staff, and I spent over 5 years working in that domain, happily, and one of my, let's say, greatest experiences in life. But I also had too many questions about why do these ideals that I fully bought in and I fully believed in clashed so hard with the reality that we were living in? Why is the humanitarian space so limited that we don't actually get most of the time to act completely upon our principles and upon the work that we wanted to do? So coming to the center was really in the right time for me, because that was when I kind of reached the limit of my capacity of understanding why I had all these questions. And when it comes to humanitarians nowadays, I think there is a shift of believing that we cannot be purely idealistic. It's important, and I still keep in heart and mind the principle of humanitarian action, but it's important to acknowledge that reality is not always like this, and that you always strive to do the best, but you need to also understand the context. You need to understand that it's not just humanitarians out there, there's development work, there's political powers, and you need to understand how to not work in silo and how to do your job, but also acknowledge and coordinate with the other actors that exist.
Arjun and Eric, does it also reflect your experience, also the importance of working, usually starting as national staff, and then the possibility, the capacity to reach professional training? Do you want to go, Eric?
Yeah, well, I didn't start as a national staff, but I work for my national government, and I think this really gave me an interesting insight. And living in a country that is in the receiving end gives you so much perspective when then you come, and try to contribute something. So I think, that change was very significant and instructive for me.
So if we continue talking a little bit more about our training offer today, these recent years we've seen that humanitarian organizations have also shifted to more a rights-based approach with an important need for a normative framework that calls for more standards, more accountability. We'll come back on this. But there were also in parallel critics that were raised within and against the humanitarian sector, issues about the humanitarian governance, Western interventionism, racism, or decolonization more recently. So turning back to you, maybe Charles-Antoine, we can start. To which extent do you consider that these past humanitarian crises that have profoundly reshaped the humanitarian sector, or even criticism that was raised against humanitarian action, to which extent does it have also reshaped the training needs inside your organization?
I would definitely say that it has shaped to some extent, because we've been looking at the training needs. We did actually a survey on the humanitarian side of the work of UNICEF. We did a survey back in 2021 across a pretty large range of practitioners, of colleagues, staff members, etc. And really trying to make sure we have a balance between international staff, national staff, etc. And it came, the results through some self kind of assessment questions show that on average, national staff felt they were something like 40% less equipped on a fairly broad range of topics. And as you know very well, there's a growing number of areas we are dealing with in the humanitarian sector. So I think that the problem became quite obvious in terms of, I guess, the training and efforts around learning, which are part of our work, were possibly almost reinforcing this inequity as opposed to addressing it. So we've put quite a lot of efforts shifting the balance. It's easier said than done, obviously, but the intention and some good work is starting in this direction. So I think that this is definitely recognized, and we are, I can't remember the term of this, we are starting what we call a local responder course in DRC as a pilot, but starting this very soon, which is purely targeting local and national actors, not talking about UNICEF staff only, but really from partners, etc. But this is only a start. So I think, again, the issue is there. And yeah, I leave it here for now. I mean, there are many other ways to address this. I think we should do that. Maybe I finish off by saying we should try to do that, I would say, at all levels. So, we also have courses which are more directed towards, let's say, mid-management or the leadership. We call it Humanitarian Leadership Program. But again, this is also something we need to be looking at in a way that doesn't reinforce this divide. So I think there are ways around, but it's quite difficult to walk the talk, but we're definitely committed to doing that.
Is it also similar changes that you currently implement in the ICRC, Claire?
Yes, I mean, I think the critics and the scandals more generally have had an impact, and I would say a positive impact, in accelerating our response within the ICRC. Obviously, I'm thinking of sexual exploitation and abuse and harassment scandal back in 2018, I believe, and that has accelerated enormously our efforts in ensuring we have compliance, integrity, ethics, training that are mandatory across the board, and the residentialization or the decolonization of aid is extremely important. Still, a driver of how we are staffing, how we are training our staff, how we are training our leaders to be more inclusive leaders, and we're not there yet. But this has shaped it to a great degree. So it's good. I think those critics are good. They help us become better. And on the flip side, I agree with Charles-Antoine. When we're able to make progress on one end, we're also we're seeing new challenges. COVID has meant much more hybrid type of learnings and online training, which is emphasizing the difference between people who don't have connections or where connectivity is bad. 6,000 of our 20,000 staff are unconnected. They are staff who are their drivers, their cleaners, and they do not have connections, and they miss out on the hybrid and online training.
Do you face similar concerns with MSF in terms of connectivity, but more generally in terms of possibilities to address some internal critiques or external critiques that are made not necessarily against MSF, but against the system itself.
So each crisis has shaped a certain type of response, and I think that's always happened, but it always happened a posteriori. What is interesting with COVID is that perhaps it triggered an immediate response, and one of the immediate response was, let's use technology to respond to those needs. And while there are some successes in terms of including in terms of inclusion and diversity, because suddenly you could translate much more courses, you can make sure that your courses are actually taking in consideration hearing impairment or visual impairment. You also have the entire problem of digital literacy. And in some ways, in addition to the infrastructure, I think what is the risk with technology is that you have an entire part of the population that may have access to the infrastructure, but just don't know how to use it, or not know how to properly use it, or use the potential. So what is interesting, at least with what we've done in MSF, is on one hand, we invested in technology, we invested in all these e-learning, but we actually emphasized the need to go as close as possible to our field workers with face-to-face training. In some ways, it's a kind of parallel movement. We went back to something that looks very basic, but making sure that face-to-face training and bedside training was still the most prominent training, to make sure that we can actually be on the sides of the doctors and nurses and midwives, to make sure that we are making sure that patients get the best treatment through training. So there's these two things, and I think we still haven't figured out how we can make sure that the digital divide is not growing, and I think this is a real thing. I'd like to think that we're trying to address DEI issues, but I don't think we're there yet. I think we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, we do. We totally understand that, and I mean, for an academic center like us, I would say this 25 years have been a moment also to address these critiques by offering, I would say, a more specialized form of training. And as you can see here in our courses, we have developed a lot since the initial master program, with probably core courses, a certificate, short courses addressing more specific needs, especially in terms of protection, in terms of advocacy, in terms of sexual violence. But we have also adapted to this need of more flexibility, more blended learning, more online learning, with its limits as well. And it was interesting, as a historian, I sort of digged up into our archives just to see what was the initial program developed when the center was launched in 1998. And to see that the original program, which was made of 5 modules, was already very interesting, because it had in its core components some elements that would become so essential in humanitarian action, especially the question of management of people and projects, but also the question of what we call today the nexus, the link between emergency and development. So today we have adapted with more flexibility. There's only one part of the program that is residential, with the need to have these face-to-face meetings, but we have also more online courses to have a more global audience involved in our program. So I'm turning again to the alumni, and I know that when we prepared this roundtable, there were some of you actually questioning the need to move into online courses, what it would change, especially from the experience that some of you had 10 years ago. So maybe I'm turning to Arjun to discuss this question of flexibility. How did you choose your courses when you were a student with the center, and how do you see this evolution today?
I think for me, being present, I think was extremely important. And of course, when I did the master's, I think you wouldn't necessarily have imagined that you could do a master's online. Of course, there were programs, but I think that was not necessarily in my conception. So I think, in one sense, I think it's great that I think it allows a lot of people to access trainings. But I think many organizations are doing that as well. They provide these kind of online trainings. So for an academic training, and when I heard that the center is moving partially online, I was a bit sad because I think I wouldn't necessarily have imagined that. I think because especially and that's because I think it's great that people can join online or you take the training to different places, but I think academic institutions are also a way where you have a flow of people and flow of ideas, and I think you can't sort of geographically just isolate people in different places. So I think that's also the role of an academic institution to facilitate that kind of interpersonal contact. So I think I think that's quite important.
Perhaps Stella, since you experienced this online flexibility, what is your perception of it?
For me, it was, coming to Geneva was a very important part because it allowed me to sit physically in one room with people coming from all over the world. So I got to talk to colleagues coming from everywhere, different organizations, different contexts. Most of the discussions that we had took place in the corridors or over a coffee. Of course, we had so much richness in the discussion within the class, but it was also about interacting outside of the classroom. Additionally, it was very important that we could go and get introduced to, let's say, the monuments that are in Geneva for humanitarian organizations, where we could go to the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, to the museum, or we could go to the UN, or even attend conferences if possible. So I think it also strengthens the discussion on localization, as that it's not a one-way discussion. That's what Arjun was saying earlier, that it is important that people come from all over the world to the places where decisions are made, and to be part of these discussions, not just on the receiving end of it.
So there's a kind of a very multicultural experience that you have, especially through this training. Maybe Mariam, how did it kind of shape your training experience being in a multicultural environment compared to your previous experience as a humanitarian worker?
I think one thing I would say, that discussion did not end in the classroom. I remember, like, during the ride from the class to our residence or the library, would be still talking about some of the things we have learned. And there were times we would never agree on how we see a certain project design or a certain intervention we've heard in the class. And it was really interesting because we've had, classmates from all over the world, from countries. I think I remember some classmates. It was the first time, for instance, they meet someone from Madagascar, I would say, or I would say it was really interesting. Definitely, there were moments where we had, I think, in all of us, and that's why I'm saying it was bringing a lot of frustration. The savior complex. We wanted to be the right. We wanted to defend our opinions, and from our perspective, I think there was a lot of discussion on localized intervention. It was coming from, I would say, really grassroots, point of views. It was, I would say, in total, it was really, really it was a very interesting experience. As I said, one of my favorite classes was the history of, humanitarian action. And it was interesting because you will look into the whole evolution of ICRC, of all the literature, and then you notice, for instance, there are a big part of the humanitarianism already exists in some cultures that maybe we're not aware of. So that was my take from that year.
Is it a training, Eric, that kind of prepare you to be, I don't know how to name it, a better humanitarian worker? Because when we prepared this roundtable, you told us that it's interesting to see how this master class, being in class with so many diverse experiences, expertise, nationalities, was actually a very good reproduction of what you would face later in the humanitarian system.
Yeah, I mean, somehow it's a preview of what is waiting for you when you work in an international organization. You have all the, academic knowledge you need to have and all of that, but I think, it's more important to have the skill of landing in a place, understanding what's going on quickly, being smart at communicating, understanding with people, from other cultures, and being able to change from one place to another, working with the interpreters. This stuff, it's really an important skill to do a good work. And so having to be with colleagues from all over the world, sharing ideas, listening, sometimes having to agree with something you don't really agree and go with it. I think it's a very interesting preview of what happens to you when you join an international organization later.
Okay, so we'll continue and move to the last part of this presentation where we will question probably more the humanitarian profiles. I just wanted to quickly address, and it's interesting also because it relates to what Gilles Carbonnier mentioned about the future of humanitarian action and where the needs are, where the trends are, where the issues are. We know that there's a higher number of people affected by crisis, a higher number of crises themselves, a problem in meeting the needs, addressing the needs. There's a lack of funding, the role of geopolitics in the volatility of context, the role of the media in emphasizing certain contexts against others, the role of technologies, the role of innovation. So there's a constant need for an academic center like us to either adapt or course training to the needs, or maybe more stand with a more critical distance and observe what's going on. So turning back to you, Charles-Antoine, because you briefly addressed the new course, one of the new certificates we have developed in partnership with UNICEF, which is the CAS Accountability to Affected People. How did you address this need for the creation of a specialized course about accountability? Why suddenly there was something needed to train not only the people at UNICEF, but also so many other participants to this course?
Well, maybe first of all, it's important to highlight the idea behind this collaboration. It was really to make a course available to a broad range of practitioners, academics, etc. Certainly not something we wanted to do for UNICEF only, because I think that would defeat the purpose. I mean, that's going back to this notion of peer-to-peer learning and going, from practitioners to more academic work, etc. I think that there's also a challenge I can see, and I may contradict somehow what I said before in terms of, this is great to have this course, but for me the challenge I can see is we have, more and more issues, areas, the sector is getting very sophisticated in some ways. We sometimes are also quite good at renaming things which we were doing before, let's be very frank. So for me, I would say the value of having a course like that is not just to zoom into a very narrow angle of, an important area, clearly, but also to see what the connections are. And I think what we see in more and more in the countries where we work and practitioners, staff working in different programs, is that they risk being overwhelmed. And I don't think, definitely the number of crises has increased, the resources are not necessarily following the same trend as we know, but I'm not sure the crises are necessarily becoming more complex. I think the way we work on the humanitarian sector or system, whatever you want to call it, is also getting quite complex. And I think there is probably a role as well to demystify or at least articulate how these things come together. And from a very practical or practitioner perspective, again, for some colleagues out there, often they are asked to wear multiple hats and focus on all these different areas, which we tend sometimes to push on them. Mm-hmm. So it's again trying to work out, what are the elements which are really potentially transformative, but definitely very important, but how do we articulate all of that? And I can see it's not something you'll do in a 1 hour training online, but having, again, the space to discuss that and see those connections, for me, is really extremely important.
Yeah. And we see also when the trend is going, as there's a growing number of participants who would like to participate in some of our new courses, like digital innovation seems to be a really important preoccupation among many humanitarian workers, as well as the need to connect issues such as the question of planetary health. But to continue on this, Claire or William, do you have yourself some sort of basic training portfolio that you consider as something essential that your employees need to have? Or do you leave them to decide about their own flexibility in addressing their training needs?
So we're trying to move away from a standard package. I think providing agency to people to be able of actually deciding and to contextualize what is useful and how it's useful, I think that's important. So we do, and onboarding is an important element, something that we want, a foundation that I think we provide to absolutely everyone. But past the onboarding and some of perhaps this more transversal elements, so DEI or management for managers, there is the understanding that we should really look more for personalized learning rather than, and when I say personalized, it doesn't mean that you can't personalize it for a group, but rather than have this blanket cover where we say everyone needs to learn the same amounts in the same way at the same time, it's rather about looking how people have their own experience and their own understanding and how we can build on. So we're trying to move away from this usual catalog approach. I'm not saying we're entirely successful, but we're trying to move away from this and to try and really have the student or the learner to actually be in some way in control and being able of interacting with what we, not what we or what I think is important, but rather what the person think is important to do his job.
So we're definitely going into the personalized learning. That's a very important trend. And I would say, aside from the onboarding training, which is much more blanket approach, where it's important for us that our staff understand what we stand for as the ICRC, what are our values, the 7 principles, our core, but also how do you, what's protection, and how do you manage safety and security issues. So that's the core. The other core is when you become a manager or leader, there's also core training that you would go through. But aside from that, everything else is pretty much personalized. We have a program called I Develop, which is quite generous, whereby staff are able to have an envelope to cover their own training needs as and when they, depending on the role that they're in. And it gives them enormous freedom to choose across the world what is the right program. But the personalization goes further than this. So for one given training, people will not take the same learning experience. So we use AI to spot the level of sophistication of the learner and adapt the program to that person. So there's a test, there's a number of questions, and an adaptation, and it's exciting. It's very exciting.
So we're moving to the conclusion of this roundtable, just sharing a few very optimistic, maybe statistics on the realities of today's humanitarian workers in terms of, I would say, the sociological profiles, just reflecting what our students most of the time mention when they come to study at the center. There's the question of the improving their skills, the career improvement, but also the importance of the university certification. And the reputation of the center, I would say it's more really connected to this idea of an international Geneva and having access to some of the monuments, as you mentioned, the monuments, the symbolic monuments, but also the headquarters themselves. a very growing importance of the change also in the number of participants coming from other continents than Europe. We've seen a growing number of participants coming from South America, from Africa since '98, from Asia, and recently from the Middle East. We've also seen a growing number of female participants since '98. It's actually the complete opposite today. We have 2/3 of our participants who are women. So it shows also the high importance of women involved in the field and the recognition of their work, but also their involvement in humanitarian training. There's an ongoing trend in the age of our participants. There seem to be pretty much between 25 to 50 years old. And it's really encouraging for us, especially since we're doing continuing training. But what we've seen recently is also more and more people who are 45 and above, kind of doing a reconversion, retraining from the private sector to the humanitarian sector. So there's this idea of finding a sense of purpose in what they do. And we know that a lot of them, this is the final one, a lot of them are actually staying in the humanitarian sector in terms of career orientation after the mass. There's a large majority still working in the humanitarian sector, but also some of them in the social sector, the development sector, a few reorientation in the private sector. So it shows this idea of staying within a sector where you have still your motivation in place, this idea of the sense of purpose. We spoke about the values earlier, so perhaps just to conclude on this, your motivations to continue to work in the humanitarian sector, how do you measure them today, evaluate them today? Maybe Eric.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very exciting work, very gratifying, but you need to be able to take in frustration as well, very much. It's really a frustrating field in so many ways, especially when you see, at least for me and my motivation also, I want to contribute, to solve a bit of that, or not solving, but to work on that. It's really how unfit the system is to face protracted situations. Not a crisis, and in the definition by the Vice President of the ICRC, it was like something happening, but truth is now you have so many countries that are getting fragile. It's a slow degradation of life. It's not a crisis. It's just life. It became like this, and this is becoming prominent in the causes of creating humanitarian need, and we are trying to respond to that, and the system is very poor and not adequate to face this issue. So, I think there is still a lot to contribute to this field.
Yeah. Same perspectives by the others, same desires, same...
Thank you. Well, personally, of course, in addition to it being a job that provides personal value, my background is a dentist, so I've always thought to myself, I could help people being a dentist, but I could also help people as much as possible doing this. For me, the difference, in addition to the values, is that it's an interesting job. It's a profession where you get to go to very different locations, different contexts, get to meet people from very different professions, different cultural backgrounds, and get direct contact with people. So in addition to it being value-driven, it's also quite interesting for me personally, for what I would like to choose in a job.
Fantastic, thank you. So we'll conclude now. We'll just like to take a few questions, if you have any for our panelists, before we move to the real celebration part. So I think there will be microphones circulating in the room, but perhaps we'll take. Est-ce que quelqu'un peut aller chercher le micro? Joël ou Thuy? No, there are microphones. Quelqu'un peut aller les chercher? Il y a des micros juste dans la salle là-bas.
For the people online.
Yeah, for the people.
Yes, please. Given Joseph's mentioned the archetype of the humanitarian as male, I thought the statistic about switching the gender profile of students was one of the most striking things on the slide. So I wanted to ask, I think still it's the case that most mid to senior managers in the humanitarian sector are male. So do those statistics show that there's been a big shift in the sector that will be reflected in 10 years' time in our leadership, or are those women going to meet with the same frustrations and ceilings that their colleagues might have done in the past? I'd be really interested to hear people's panel. My name's Kim, I'm from the H2H network.
So I can share a response from the center perspective, but I think it would be interesting to see also maybe Claire, since you work in the HR at I3C. In our perspective, what we see is there a similar number of applications to the center coming from men and women. But we do also have a policy of supporting female candidates, thanks to our donors as well. So we're trying as much as we can to also accept and give, because we have a scholarship diplomacy program. So we do emphasize female participants with this scholarship program. But I don't know how much it reflects the politics of recruitment and the realities of women profiles in the humanitarian sector.
So the good news is I think there is an enormous appetite from humanitarian organizations to hire women at senior level. Just to share a few statistics, I like to share statistics when I'm in HR because HR is sometimes very sentimental and subjective. So 45% of our manager positions at ICRC are held by women across the world. 38% of our heads of delegations in the field are women. And it's not enough for us, but where we're not able to get to parity is because there is still an issue in finding female leaders who at some point in their lives want to be not in a hardship delegation away from their children, which is understandable, but in a family mission. And that's really, today, the challenge we haven't been able to crack. So there's great appetite, we want to be at parity, but it's very difficult for us to attract experienced female leaders in places such as Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan today.
I think there was a question. Yeah, Henri?
Thank you, everyone. My name is Henry Nzeimana. I am currently living in the United States of America. I am the alumnus of this center 2014-2015, and I thank you again for the chance that you gave me to come and learn and now be able to serve other people where I am located now. I work as a program coordinator for refugee student services in our district of education in Tucson, in Arizona. We have currently around 1,000 refugee students from kindergarten to grade 12. And they come from Africa, from Middle East, from Eastern Europe, from Asia. And we are, as a coordinator, I see how important my presence in this center is helping me to not only to understand the global challenges that our students come with, but also how they struggle to fit in the new society where they are in terms of culture, but also educational perspectives, because they come from different education systems. And I would say that what I learned here is helping me to have a global vision, but also perspectives and working with different actors to make sure that refugee students have access to equitable, inclusive, and diverse educational perspectives. Regarding this conference tonight, I would like just to share some background information and then suggest 3 reflections. I would like to hear from the panel how we can envisage the future of humanitarian response. I would first talk about the geopolitical turbulence that sweeps across many parts of the world, in Eastern Europe, in Middle East, in Central, Western, and Northern Africa, but also the resurgence of armed conflict and massive displacement of populations in those countries affected by war and displacement. We all see an alarming trend of states being the main violators of human rights. You know them. I will not name them here for just being diplomatic and political. But we're also seeing a multiplicity of non-state actors. You know about, for example, the Wagner Group in most parts of Africa, in Sudan, in Mali, in Burkina Faso. And the ravages they are bringing on the lives of civilian population, the massacre on populations living in those countries, just being victims of the greed and the competition for power among the biggest superpowers we know today. We are also seeing kind of what I would say the protracted conflict feeding off each other with humanitarian response. If I take, for example, the Eastern Congo that you may know of, we have a conflict that has been going for the last 24 years. And at the same time, we have the presence, for example, of the UN Mission for Stabilization in Congo. It's been there for the last 24 years, and yet Eastern Congo has never seen even one single year of stability and peace. Yeah. Populations still are on the run. Women are being raped on a daily basis. Children are being utilized in mines and dying there and not having access to education.
So can you allow me? We'll probably already take your questions here because there's a lot that you share in terms of problems and issues. The question of geopolitics and the question of protracted crisis. It's an open question we can have with our panelists, especially since you mentioned the role of education to face these issues and to consider also the place of an academic center that is not involved in the humanitarian response itself, but that questions some of the ongoing issues that you mentioned, the protracted crisis, the level of violence against civilians, the involvement or the mix of geopolitics with attacks against humanitarian organizations and attacks against healthcare is crucial. I don't know how, as a center, we explain why such issues are still ongoing factors affecting the humanitarian system. We can explain them. We're not part of the possibilities to solve them, but I think it's important to maintain a space like a center like us to offer a critical debate where we can raise issues about politics, where we can raise issues about obstacles to humanitarian action, about the attacks against humanitarian values and the principles. I see lots of heads shaking, but you probably want to share something? Anyone? Charles-Antoine.
I mean, there's a lot to these points on the question, but I mean, that's something I wanted actually to touch upon because I can see the role of the center, and I know that the discussion focused on learning and training and so on, which is obviously very important. But obviously the center is also a space for discussions, for debates, and I would imagine also has the capacity to offer some solutions, so to at least think through some of these fairly hard questions that we rarely find the time to fully address when we are in the middle of crisis situations. I mean, when I saw in one of the slides this new area around system thinking accelerator, I have no clue what that means, to be very frank, but at the same time I could sense that there is, this kind of, I imagine this is a partnership and there's a sort of future dimension to it. I can imagine this kind of collaboration or areas can be very beneficial as well. We are struggling with a number of things. We talk a lot about durable solutions. You mentioned Eastern Congo. I was last couple of weeks there. There's very little we can do with limited resources, 6 million IDPs, etc. We try our best, but we've been there for so many years. This is an area where I guess some further thinking and exchanges or discussions, whatever, but could really help us a big way, I would say. And this comes up more and more in those situations. Looking at the future of the humanitarian system again, I think that there are lots of elements where having a safe space to have those discussions or partnerships, collaborations. Gilles Carbonnier mentioned the collaboration with the EPFL and ETZ in Switzerland. There are huge potentials out there, and this is probably where you can play this connecting role.
And not only with the academic and the humanitarians, there's a role of the private sector, the technology companies, especially when it comes to innovations. And there's a reason why we call them innovation hubs as well. Maybe
excuse me,
a few last questions. Yes?
I think you cut me before I just give the 3 reflections I had for the panel. And the one would be the early warning system and anticipatory action. The crisis in Ukraine and the current conflict in Gaza and Israel, I think took many people by surprise. Are we as humanitarian able to work with others to set up an early warning system where we can predict and prepare and be ready to offer humanitarian assistance needed? The second one is access to civilian populations and humanitarian aid. We see the crisis in Gaza where civilians are not able to access humanitarian aid, where ICRC was listening this morning, have not been able to access the hostages to provide them with medical care or psychosocial support. And the last one I would suggest here is how are we as humanitarian actors able to position ourselves in the nexus humanitarian development and peace. I listen to populations in Eastern Congo. They don't want to be in refugee camps. They say we want to go back home and work on our own projects and have peace. That's the only thing we need. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about accountability, we should listen to the people in crisis what they want, not deliver assistance to the supply of we, the donors and actors, think people need this instead of listening to them and provide what they need to survive and thrive in their own communities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for these elements. It's an ongoing. These are ongoing situations that also question how much. As a training center, as an education center, we take into consideration what's currently happening in order to adapt what we offer. And not necessarily in courses, but also by organizing webinars, by organizing conferences, by organizing workshops in which we can explore very quickly aspects by gathering people, by gathering experts, by gathering scholars to discuss this before creating really a new course and adapting the training to the elements you're mentioning. So the situation in Gaza, the situation in Ukraine is definitely questioning us, and I think it will profoundly reshape also part of our course training. We'll actually reach out to the alumni next year because we're going to re-explore our course catalog also to see how much it is reflecting the current issues, the current debates, the current discussions that are taking place among humanitarian workers and the system. So we'll actually keep your elements to discuss that further next year when we'll organize a few surveys with all of you. But I would also like to take maybe another question. Yes, please.
Hi,
before
if I may.
we conclude.
My name is Natalie Klein. I work for the ICRC.
Yeah.
25 years ago, I did my PhD in what would now be called humanitarian action research, but at that point, that term didn't even exist. My 17-year-old son announced recently, somewhat to my dismay, that he wishes to study as a bachelor international relations, humanitarian action or development. So my question is, where is this going? I mean, 25 years ahead, you know, are we all going to be studying this not sort of as a master, but this is going to, and where is everybody going to work if everybody studies that?
An interesting point. I think what we see today, especially in Switzerland, is that we do have this, our master program, Master of Advanced Studies, which involves really humanitarian professionals. We do not train younger people, people who are starting university but who would like to know more about humanitarian action, and there's definitely a huge number of younger people, a new generation that would like to know more and to work in humanitarian action. There's definitely a need in Switzerland to create these kind of master programs, not in international relations, not in political sciences, but specifically in humanitarian studies. So I hope one day there will be a department of humanitarian studies at the University of Geneva, as we do have department about peace studies, about development studies, about gender studies. It's the recognition of this field, but it's also a question to which extent you can train or you can really learn humanitarian action without starting the job at the same time. So we go back to this whole balance between having a technical expertise. Does it make you a good humanitarian actor, and what's the academic portfolio you need to have at the same time, the curriculum portfolio you need to have at the same time in order to work in the humanitarian sector. So we do have so many volunteers who ask to be trained with us, but they don't have any experience. So we have to refuse them, but it questions us to which extent we should create that in a country like Switzerland that has such an important humanitarian tradition. Yeah, I think it shows part of the idealistic need of people to get involved in a sector that still represents something in which they can develop a professional career. But there's also the need also to address sometimes a bit of the fantasies that exist about this sector as well. So it's part of the social sciences discussions that we have with a more critique of the system itself. A last question, maybe? Yes.
Hi, I'm Felipe Ribeiro from the Interfaith Peacemakers and Brazil Hunger Combat Front. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous, but in 2016, the UNESCO has released an open education recommendation for all university studies, and most of the knowledge that is being produced by academia in humanitarian issues are not getting to the global south, especially endangered areas, specialists and agents. So I would like to ask, how much have you been working on open humanitarianism and dialogue with other cathedrals from Switzerland, and such as the conference that happened yesterday on humanitarian design? Thank you very much.
Yeah, a very important question. I think that some of our colleagues here mentioned that you do start having specific trainings for local responders, and it's part of the knowledge sharing within the Global South, I think, and it's some of the aspects we'll evoke for the future of the center. But one of the idea would be to to delocalize more the courses. That's part of the perspectives we're looking at for the future. But when we say delocalize, it's also to relocalize and co-organize with universities in the South, I think. Our perspective here is to facilitate that, not to train them ourselves, but to facilitate a forum, a platform, a place, a hub, where not only local responders, but scholars from universities in the South, experts, humanitarian practitioners in the South can organize this kind of center. Maybe one day we'll have several humanitarian centers like us in the South, where we can engage also in co-sharing this knowledge production. But we'll continue, please continue our discussions. We'll have a celebrative moment outside, so don't hesitate to continue the discussion. Carl will conclude this session.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to mention a little bit, we trained around 200 people per year. This year we offered 60 scholarships, okay? And the University of Geneva, not only is this center, but University of Geneva at the Institute of Global Health, which is the cheapest master in global health in the world. University of Geneva offers a lot of scholarships for students. And we know it's not enough, and this center, this is why we keep moving ahead, because we do think that every time we offered 5 places for a course, full scholarship, we received 60 applications from local organizations. These are the ones we wanted to target. There's so much need, and we know we need to continue, and this is what we're going to do. In research, we've got a policy of open access publications. It does mean that we pay for the publication fees so that readers can get access for free to articles, scientific papers. And we know we need to continue this trend, and that's going to continue. And this is exactly the mandate of this center. To achieve this, just a few words, a few seconds of attack of your time before we go and share a glass together. We do that, the way we achieved is very much in terms of teaching, but as well in terms of research. And it seems to be trivial, but it's all about collaboration and partnership. So it's not something, I would say, it's not a beautiful word and to live in a beautiful world. This is not that. It is very realistic about the way of having an impact and very much making a difference is all about having good partnerships. And this center has continued a tradition you had built over the years, building this kind of relationship to be better, to be more effective and more efficient in many, many places. We do work in some of the most challenging places in the world. I gave a few examples. Afghanistan, I just come back from Ethiopia, and we work in northern Nigeria. A colleague of us just left tonight to go and start a study over there in northern Nigeria. And to achieve that, and the only way of better understanding this kind of context is the only way of doing that is to work with implementers, international organizations, but national organizations. We work a lot with the Red Cross movement in Nigeria and Ethiopia, but as well to work with national researchers. Every time we do a study, every time we start a new course, it's all about co-development. We work with UNICEF, we work with MSF and RCRC, and Aga Khan University and other universities. And the only way of mixing different perspectives, but as well different understanding of the context, is to achieve this kind of collaboration. The way we have achieved diversity and in terms of geographies, but as well having achieved this gender balance in our courses, which is, and I've got a few colleagues working in other organizations offering courses, and they have not achieved this kind of gender balance, is very much about offering accessibility to our courses. Geneva is not the center of the world. It will never be. But to make sure that people can enjoy and make the most of it, benefiting from the experience of international organizations here in Geneva, benefiting from this beautiful academic environment, we know that many course participants need some support from their employers. RCRC, MSF offer a lot of support so that their staff can benefit from these courses. But as well through scholarship, we know that a lot of you come from national, are employed as national staff in some of the international organizations. They need this kind of support. And as well, what we have talked about in Istanbul in 2016, making sure that local responders, the first responders in every humanitarian crisis, can get access to this kind of knowledge and experience. And so I just wanted to say, these are some of the people who have supported this center over the years, and I'm pretty sure that you had many other support in the years before, but without this support, technical, financial, sometimes in kind, I mean, all these organizations, they contribute intellectually to the research we do, to the courses we produce. That's important. So I just want to thank all this support, the people who have supported this center, and of course we're going to keep knocking at your door because we have an important mission, and it's important that we expand the benefit this center can offer to local NGOs, to local responders, and we will keep doing knocking on your door and asking for support, either intellectual support, in kind, or financial. So thank you very much. Now, I just want to give a big thank you to our panelists and to Valérie for facilitating this debate. And we want to see you and share a drink with us. So thank you very much. Maybe you can put the next slide.